Hey everyone, welcome back. So thank you for Johnny, the previous session before the break. Good to see some of the latest and greatest inside of BIM 360. Such fantastic product now that's coming on leap and bounds every day and every week with new features and functions. So yeah, really good session. Now for something a bit different, I guess, or a bit more laid back. So what I want to focus on during this session is visualization tools, with a focus on what visualization tool is perhaps best for a given project. And I'm going to try and give 3 examples. Now, we are pretty limited on time today with a 45-minute session. When me and Nath put this day of agenda together, we talked about really wanting to show you all the different tools and all of the bells and whistles. But in a 45-minute session, I've got no hope of being able to demo and show off Max and other tools like Enscape and Twinmotion and all of the others out there. So what I've tried to do is condense everything down to a nice short 45-minute session whilst still giving examples and stories around how a different visualization tool might suit one project over another. And that's what we're going to do. Much like all the other sessions, fire in your questions through the chat channel at the bottom in your Zoom window, and the guys will get through to answering those as soon as they can. So typically, I'm going to start this off with a question, mainly because I can, but secondly, I really want to engage you guys and see what it is that you're currently doing. So quite simply, at the moment, whether you're a one-man band, whether you are a large-scale organization, how are you currently visually communicating your ideas and design-based decisions? Are you A, running through a 2D sketch or a 2D sheet? B, outsourcing a visualization to a specialist? C, sat down in something like Revit and actually presenting the 3D model to someone? Or D, not currently visualizing or communicating those ideas visually? So I'll give you 20 seconds or so. The answers will, if they haven't already popped up on your screen, please dial in your answer and we'll have a look at the results in just a few seconds. Perfect, thank you for that. I can see that we've got some results in front of me here, and actually they're not too dissimilar to what I imagined, to be honest with you. So out of all of those feedbacks that we received, the majority of you are basically just presenting the 3D model. So whether that's sitting inside of Revit if you're a Revit user, AutoCAD if you're an AutoCAD user, Plant 3D, ArchiCAD, whatever it might be, typically you're sitting inside of that CAD model and you're using that as a visual platform, which is absolutely fantastic. The fact that you're actually doing that and you are visualizing those ideas through your parametric model, which is great. But I guess there are a lot of other options. And it might be that some of those options seem too far-fetched or too difficult to achieve, or maybe that you don't know what those options are, or maybe how accessible they can be for you or your organizations. So if we just strip that back and have a look at the options when it comes to visualization, because I guess traditionally it's quite a dark art. It's pretty cool, I would say that as the self-confessed geek, but you know, it is quite a dark art, rendering and getting a high-end visualization. And there's so many options nowadays. But that's actually a good thing, because all the competition out there, whether it's an Autodesk product, a third-party product, something by any one of the vendors out there, they're all competing in such a densely populated market. So we're getting functionality that's better than before, prices that are cheaper than before, and more importantly, things that are more accessible to you guys as designers than it ever has been before. So whether we're looking at 3ds Max, most of you on this session today will probably have, if you're Autodesk users, an AEC collection. And inside of that collection, you have a license of 3ds Max, which is, arguably speaking, one of the most commonly used and high-end rendering tools on the market. You have third-party options outside of the Autodesk channel, like Cinema 4D, like Lumion, which are hugely used in the industry. You've got render engines like V-Ray, which will tap into your SketchUp, they'll tap into your Revit, they'll tap into other applications like Max, for example, to make those processes easier than ever before. We've got more newcomers almost to the industry, like Enscape and Twinmotion, tools that are pretty cheap in comparison to the other products, but not necessarily less feature-rich. So Enscape, instant rendering, at the press of a button. Twinmotion, the ability to really present your ideas and present your projects in a way that you might not have thought was possible. And all of that can be done from directly inside of Revit, which of course has its own ray tracing functionality embedded as well, should you want it. But on top of that, you've also got the ability to use Arnold, is another one. That's a plugin for 3ds Max that comes out of the box now with Max. We'll talk about that a bit more in a second. But you also have the ability to outsource. And many of you will be outsourcing, as I said earlier, to specialists who have been rendering all day, every day for the past however many years. So what I really want to do is take what I see as three of the not only main, but most accessible and easy to use tools out there on the market. And it won't surprise you, being an Autodesk house, that 3ds Max is in that list. Stunning product, which will give you absolutely stunning results so long as you have the time available to get them. But then some third-party products on there as well, like Enscape and Twinmotion, both of which are relatively new to this scene, I guess, if you compare them to the likes of Max, which has been around for 20 years or so. They're relatively new, but that doesn't mean they're any less proficient in creating a result. And what we need to do when we look at these is kind of weigh up what one gives you that the other one doesn't. So are you after, top of the range photorealistic rendering, or do you want something that's good enough that you can get at the press of a button extremely quickly? Or do you want something in between that's going to give you a really high quality render, but maybe you spend a little bit more time finessing and getting something that's exactly as you want it? And really what I want to use this session for is to talk through those options. We've had a lot of PowerPoint today, so I'm going to try and keep the slides to a minimum and spend the majority of this session inside of a product. So if we start with 3ds Max, I'm not going to demo this one live today because of the nature of Max. It is a bit of a beast. It does take a bit of TLC to get your model to where you want it to be. But as you can see from the slides on our screen, especially now using the Arnold render engine that Max comes with out of the box nowadays, you can get stunning imagery. And when I say stunning imagery, photorealistic. These images and these renders that you can get out of this application, they have ray tracing, they have global illumination, and they're going to be able to give you the best quality image that you would want from your projects. The benefit of that is you get something that's stunning, but the downside of that is you get something that potentially takes a little bit longer to work on, a little bit more time to finesse. But to get a result like what you see on the screen at the moment, which is a render from Arnold in 3ds Max, you just would never get that quality from another application such as Enscape or Twinmotion, for example. As well as the more specific renders, you've also got the ability to tie it directly into Revit to take a Revit building and get that Revit building presented and rendered, whether it be a still or a video-based animation in its best light, so to speak. But it will take you some time to add the materials, add the custom textures, tweak the lighting, and set that scene up the way in which you want it to. So in my mind, if you're after that high-end result, that result that really is going to give you better than anything else, you want to spend some time training, consulting, and getting up to speed with 3ds Max, because again, you've probably got it in your arsenal of weapons, so to speak. It's in your box. It's just a case of finding out what it can do for you and why. 9 times out of 10, to be honest with you, the projects don't necessarily call for that level of visualization. So what happens when you've got something that is somewhere in between wanting that massive high-end render or something that is a little bit easier to access? So what you can see on the screen at the moment is a product called Twinmotion. Twinmotion we've had a relationship now with for a few months in the UK, and this is now a product that can be purchased in the UK as a product that ties into the likes of Revit and so on and so forth. And what Twinmotion does is it synchronizes with Revit to bring your model, and it allows you to do stuff that would otherwise be reserved inside of a game engine environment. So as you can see, I can very quickly paint landscaping objects like trees, grass, flowers, other foliage options, and I can start to bring an area or a scene to life. I can very quickly go into a pre-existing material library, for example, and find superb quality, high-end textures with both a diffuse map to be able to give it a color and a look and feel, but also a bump map or a normal map to be able to actually give it a texture. On top of that, the ability to change the weather, change the time of day, and really customize how we're presenting our model. In the example you can see on your screen, and I have sped it up some amount of time, for your reference, this is about a 45-minute video that I've trimmed down to about 4 minutes for the purpose of this demonstration. So to get this quality out, you're not talking hours. 45 minutes from scratch is not a long time to get the kind of outputs that you'll see. But I'm bringing across Revit geometry, and I'm doing a mixture of adding landscape options like grass and other trees and bushes, going in and adding some custom objects like the planters you saw at the front there. And now I'm coming in and I'm taking basically Revit walls, Revit floor slabs and ceilings, and I'm adding twin motion textures. By all means, if you've got good quality textures inside of Revit, they will be sent across. But to do things like this, getting particle effects inside of your Revit model to present an area or bring the atmospherics of an area to life, second to none. You're just not going to be able to do this inside of other applications like Twinmotion, because these are normally reserved for game engines. Twinmotion actually runs off the game engine. It's owned by Epic Games. It runs off the Unreal Engine. So as that engine progresses, and any geek out there like me who's been following the PS5 or the Xbox Series X release and announcements will be looking at the Unreal Series Engine 5, that's coming out, and the progression of real-time ray tracing and real-time lighting effects to kind of imagine how far this will get this kind of output to is pretty stunning. And what you can see here is, after a few minutes in this case, you can get a really, really nice result. On top of that, to be able to go in and tweak landscaping, to be able to go in and add water effects, add more foliage to really bring that scene or that location to life. You've got so many more options that I just didn't demonstrate as part of this base demonstration. But adding people walking through a scene, adding animated cars through a scene. If you made that snow, those cars would leave tire tracks. The people would leave footprints. And really, to get to this point, again, it's a 45-minute demo, it's superb. What you might have noticed there, if you have eagle eyes, is I actually went back to Revit and made a change. So there's a window in the background that's currently missing now because I've deleted it in Revit and just resynchronized the model. So the ability to really create this high-end visual presentation, not just quickly, but also easy, that really gives you something that otherwise you may not have been able to do with other tools. Okay, and again, it's accessible. It's a tool for a designer, for a Revit user at a very, very low price point. And that tool can be taken as far as you want to be able to create still outputs, video outputs, self-running executables that you do not need a license of the product to run. Similar to Enscape for those of you that use that, bit bigger footprint with regards to its size. But again, the functionality here really is fantastic. It's a joy to use, but it's also easy to use. Bit of a whistle-stop tour. Anyone that wants to see that demo live, then by all means get in touch. We can ping you the full unedited video, or absolutely we can come and show you that in full time. But actually I wanted to spend the majority of this session, as I said, in an application. I couldn't choose all three, so I decided to choose Enscape. The reason I decided to choose Enscape as a product to focus in is purely the ease of getting a quality output. And what we're going to do now is we're going to jump out of the PowerPoint and spend the rest of the session directly inside of both Revit and Enscape, showing you how quickly and easily you can start to get some pretty good results that are nearing, I wouldn't say photorealistic, but they're getting near to that point where you can get something as per the image on your screen that's very refined, very crisp, very clean, without spending hours upon hours to do that. So just give me a couple of seconds to transition over, get the machine set up, and we'll jump straight into Revit. So we're just going to jump straight into Revit. I've got Revit 2021 open. Not that that really matters, because the functionality you're about to see is pretty much in every version of Enscape, in every version of Revit. So let's just jump in and have a little look. I have pre-opened the model and I've pre-started Enscape just to save a little bit of time, but apart from that you're kind of looking at a plain canvas, so to speak. So what we have is a pretty simple model. It's just a multi-story, multidisciplinary building. So the ground floor, we've got some shared office space, and then we've got some other shared office space and residential. But we're just going to be focusing in and around the ground floor. And if we just jump onto a floor plan for the ground floor, you can see that we've got a pretty generic floor plan. Now, the only difference I guess I've got in here is that the furniture that you'll see is Enscape assets. I'll explain what that is as we progress through the demonstration. But I've just spent a little bit of time adding some information in there and making this look a little bit nicer for the purpose of this session today. But I'll strip that back and explain who, what, how and why as we go through the session. So literally, I'm going to head straight over to my Enscape tab. You would normally have a big start button at the top here. And by pressing that, it would launch up Enscape with a loading screen, and then you would get into your model. And the first thing you'll notice is just sat on the outside of the building here. I mean, the pano doesn't really make much sense from this particular angle, but instantly we get a model that's really crisp. And this is what I love about Enscape. It's so easy to use, but yet the result it gives you is pretty good right out the box. So I'm just going to fly in through the door here and just stick myself in the corner of this reception area. And I'm just going to leave it for a couple of seconds, because what you'll see and what you'll hear probably through the microphone and my fans is that Enscape will now iterate. It will go through an iteration process to make that render as crisp as it can based on your settings. Now, the laptop I'm running today is pretty high spec. It's a this year released Dell Precision laptop. It's got an RTX Quadro P4000 in there, so it's pretty high spec. So sometimes you have to wait a little bit longer to get those more refined images. I am running on the ultra settings. But you kind of get the idea of how it works. When you're moving around, it still looks very nice, but if you look closely at the sofa, for example, on the left-hand side, you will see a lot of noise on that sofa. But as soon as you let the camera sit there, it will start doing its ray tracing. It will start doing what it needs to do to get that image as refined as it needs to be. And essentially, if I just slowly walk through this building, what we have is a pretty typical Revit model. So we have two methods of going around inside of Enscape. We can walk, in which case it knows that you can't walk through a wall, for example. Or we can put it in fly mode, where you can basically go wherever it is that you want it to go. So you can fly around the scene. Typically I like it in walk mode, unless I'm going up through the floors or wanting to have a look at the void space, because it knows that I can walk through doors. And it also knows that I can walk up and down stairs. So it's got a level of intelligence as to how it's navigating you around the model. And what I have with regards to materials here is every material that you see in this model is a default Revit material. So that floor is the bog standard Revit oak flooring material that's been sat in Revit for years. Enscape's just taking it with its bump map and it's refining it. It's adding reflections and it's making it look, to be honest, as good as it can with the settings that you give it. The same with the bin here. That's just using a default chrome material and it's looking like a nice chrome effect on that bin. So if we just make our way round the side of the building, you should get to an area that's a little bit more detailed, and you can see the ray tracing on the floor, the reflections. You're really getting fantastic performance out of this RTX card that I'm running in this machine. And we're just going to move over to the corner of this room to match the kind of render that I had in the PowerPoint. And again, I'm just going to leave it for a couple of seconds just to let it do its thing, and you'll really start to see, wow, it's giving you some great results. And actually, you could look at these results and imagine that I could have been sat here waiting for a render for an hour, when all I'm doing is I'm getting to a camera that I quite like, or indeed moving to a saved camera inside of Revit, and I'm getting that image there and then, which is fantastic. A couple of other little things before I start moving too much around. So we've got loads of options. We have a little toolbar at the bottom of our screen up here. I've got a 4K screen, apologies, on this laptop, so it's quite small, so you probably can't see what it says. But it's just telling me the controls. So I've got my moving around controls, but I've also got some other controls, like if I press B, for example, on my keyboard for building information modeling, I could go and select one of these light fittings here and click. By selecting that light fitting, it's going to give me all of the information with regards to that particular component. Now, this component was downloaded off the internet. I don't think it was an MBS component, but it does have a level of information attached to it. But essentially, whatever you have, so I'm going to select my favorite thing in this whole model, which is this nice chocolate donut, and we can see that's just an Enscape asset, so there's no particular information against it. But again, if I come and select the light fitting again, you'll see the wealth of information attached to it. So we can access that BIM information directly inside of the rendered environment. Another thing we can do is we can use collaboration tools, and this is pretty new inside of Enscape. This is the ability to identify something or note something. And to do that, literally I can press C for collaborate on my keyboard, and I get a new menu pop up on the left. I'm just going to do a very manual issue on there today, but you could link this with the likes of, I don't know, BIMtrack, for example, to be able to synchronize issues between Enscape, Revit, Solibri, Navisworks, you name it, using those BIMtrack servers or any of those other native tools like that, for example. So for example here, I might say, okay, well, this office doesn't look particularly COVID safe. There's far too many people in here. And actually I want to make it real because we're having these conversations with this client. So I want to make my render and my visualizations of that particular project or particular environment as true to life at the moment as we have it. So I'm going to maybe select this desk here and say that I want to create an issue. We can choose what type of issue that is. So I can just say that that's a new issue, give it a title, perhaps a title. So let's say COVID-19, and let's say perhaps reposition individuals to align to our COVID-19 risk assessment. Just to make it a little bit more specific, for example, of the current day and age. So I can link that issue position to be just here. That gives me a little marker on the screen. I could get a different screenshot if I wanted to. I'm quite happy with that. I might just add a comment and say, not hugely important for the viz, but be nice to show how things will actually be when we get back to the office, for example. So, you know, it supports all of that kind of noting and commenting. And then that issue is saved away. The idea being you can then go and push that issue somewhere, someone else can see that issue, they can comment on it, and you can start to have these instant collaboration effects, which is great. And to have that inside of your visualization tool is second to none. It's fantastic to have that kind of level of functionality. Against that, we can also bring up a little Minimap. If we open up the Minimap, we just get this map at the top left, which just shows us the ground floor. We can see where we are just here, standing in this little corner. And again, if I move myself around, you'll notice that that little marker will move around the model and show you where you are in reality. We can also click to move ourselves to any particular position in that office. Okay. This lady looks quite concerned that we're stood there, so we're going to go back to this default position and turn the Minimap off. Other things that we can do is change the time of day. So I can just do a shift and right click and then move my mouse. And if you just take a look, you'll see that the model starts to get darker and darker and darker. The artificial lights will come on. Time of day is currently in the bottom right. So I'm going to stop about there. We can see the artificial lights have turned on. We can't actually see the emit shapes, which is a bit of a shame with these particular lights because they're photometric. But that aside, again, you get the same stunning quality render for very little input. They're default Revit lights. I haven't got to add any specific lighting setups or anything like that. It's using whatever you set inside of Revit. These are manufacturers' downloaded Revit models with their photometric web files, they act just like the lights would in reality, which is exactly what I want. As well as being a self-confessed geek, I'm also quite lazy, so anything I can do to really save time and be more productive, but without having to put more legwork in, I'm all over it. And this, for me, I use the light that I want to use, that I want to specify for the project, and the benefit of that is, well, it looks right as well on the render, which is great. As well as changing the lighting, should you really want to, you can look at the stars in the sky. You can just about see the stars in the sky there, and if I move the time of day, you can see the stars go by. And you can change the amount of clouds and contrails and so on and so forth, should you want to. We'll just go back to the daytime, maybe just early afternoon for the purpose of this, and carry on with some of the different options. So what else can we do? If I jump back into Revit, it might be that we want to make a change. So those issues that we had, or that we logged, was that maybe this isn't a COVID safe environment. So maybe I want to go in and make some changes to the Revit model. Now, I can't present two screens at the same time using this technology today, which is a shame, so sorry about that. So I have to do a little bit of alt and tabbing, but I have Enscape open and it's still running. Again, you can probably hear the fans through the microphone there. But what I'm going to do is grab this donut and I'm going to delete it because I like donuts, so I've just eaten it. If I go back, you can instantly see that that piece of geometry has disappeared. It's gone. It's no longer there. The second you make a change in Revit, should you want it to, you can propagate those changes directly to Enscape. If you don't want them to be direct, you can also pause live updates, which may allow you potentially to make a bigger change. Like, for example, this is certainly not a safe working environment for COVID, so maybe we want to take out this person, maybe we want to move their chair and show it tucked back in under the desk. This person can stay here. This person's a little bit close to the walkway, so perhaps we'll pull those out, and again we'll rotate this chair around a little bit and drag it back in. Being quite lazy, I'm sure you'll excuse me for that today, but at the moment in Enscape those changes have not been sent across to the model, so the two individuals are still sat at their desks. However, if I come in and say resume, it will instantly send those changes across. Whether they are things being added, things being moved, things being deleted, they will instantly update. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to re-render your model. You don't have to reanimate your model. So for me, that really is a huge benefit of using this tool. Other areas where it really saves you time, as well as these stills, are animations. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how keyframe animation works inside of Enscape. And then we're going to start looking at some of the more specific settings that we can turn on and chop and change to really give you a flavour about what makes this product so special. So I'm just going to press K on my keyboard. That's opening up my video editor. And literally anyone that's done any kind of animation in another application before, you'll be well versed with keynotes. So think about Aardman animations like Wallace and Gromit and things like that, where they move, they take a picture, they move, they take a picture, they move, they take a picture. Similar thing. I'm going to move the camera, add a keyframe. Move the camera, add a keyframe. And it will automatically do the transitions and the animations and smoothness between them. So I'm going to add a keyframe at the start. I'm going to move over here, add another keyframe. And you can add as many to make it smoother and more specific with regards to its path, or less to make it maybe not quite as smooth, so to speak, and not quite as specific. And I'm just going to literally spin round almost 180 and end up looking at the office from this angle, at this person that was sat here doing some Revit schedules. Once I've done that, I'm going to press preview, and that will preview me my animation. Okay, so you can basically see it's using that path that I've defined, and it's given me an animation. It's quite a small area, and I've added quite a few keyframes, so it's a bit jumpy, if you see what I mean. There's no smooth transition between them. But once you've got that, you can see that I actually have this spline on my screen, and with that spline, I can click any segment or any camera and change the camera at that given point in time. That might be at that keyframe, I want to change the time of day, or I want to zoom in or zoom out, or change the depth of field. It might be that actually I don't want that keyframe in there, I want to delete it. That will remove that one out. You'll notice you can put another one in when you have these areas where you have a big enough gap. If I just delete a couple of them, not all of them, there we go. If I just delete a couple of them, just to show you how it handles those larger transitions, let's preview that again. You can see it doesn't jump, it actually makes that transition a bit smoother. You just have left control about how it's moving. But typically speaking, you get a really good job. I'm just going to press K to close that video editor, which will just hide that spline. It's still always there, should we want to edit it in the future. So alongside that, what else can we do to start customizing and getting different options on our outputs? And again, this is so easy to use, which is part of why I like it so much. If I come back into Revit, I've got some really simple to use settings. So firstly, under settings, we have generic settings and we have visual settings. I'm not going to go through all of them today because quite frankly, we don't need to. But all you need to know is that inside of Enscape, we have full customization. So the screen, when it's loading, the icon that it shows, the title that it shows in the render, that can be customized. That's fantastic when you're customer facing or when you're sharing the outputs with the customer, because it will actually look like one of your experiences, if you like. It will show maybe the client's logo or your logo, a specific image or a specific title. And again, it's just picking up image files, so it's really easy to use. For those of you with a fast enough graphics card, we can turn on things like RTX mode, whether or not we want it to render grass, and all kinds of things as you would expect it to do. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of those settings today because frankly they're not needed for the purpose of this session, but it's useful to know that they're there, and many of them are just a single tick box or a simple slider. That's more important when we come to the visual settings. And for me, again, this is where it's second to none. I get 4 really simple tabs. Under my rendering tab, you can see that I'm currently running on ultra quality. Just to give you a flavor, I'm going to drop that down to draft. If I jump back into the model, this is Enscape on its absolute lowest quality. It's still pretty good, right? It's still crisp. You're not getting the reflections and you're not getting the shadows, the soft shadows, the lighting quite that you were getting before, but you still get something that's really crisp. It's easier to navigate than fumbling through a 3D view in Revit or fumbling through a load of different 3D views in Revit or SketchUp or another 3D application that you may be using. So even at its lowest settings, this is giving you something beyond what you might be getting just presenting something back inside your CAD software. The jumps then become noticeable as you go through. I'll just jump to high rather than ultra to give you a flavor of what that looks like. That obviously brings back in the bloom, that brings back in the ambient lighting, and the ray tracing starts to come back on as well. Okay, but all of those are just a scrubber. It's just a scroll bar. You don't have to go in and specifically tweak ambient occlusion levels or how much refraction you want in a particular material. You're just tweaking some slider bars, which is great. Those of you that like more of a sketchy look and feel, we can start turning on some outlines. So if I go to 20% outlines, for example, and load up the model, maybe it's not quite enough, but just now you can see that I'm starting to get some edges appear on here. I'm going to turn them up to 56%, and you'll start to get more of a sketchy look and feel. That's fantastic to get those hand sketch, almost very sketchy feel visualizations, which is great. And again, it's just a slider. How much sketchy lines do you want, or how little sketchy lines do you want? And I know many of you are using the sketchy lines view inside of Revit to do such a thing. We can also change it to a white model. It might be that we haven't confirmed look, feel, aesthetics yet with the client, and you just want to show that paper render. We can do that again just by clicking a button, and it will give me that paper look, that paper feel, that paper render or paper model look, which again is great, just being able to turn that on or off. A particular favorite of mine is the light view, and this isn't simulating, this is just giving me an idea of lux levels inside of that environment, and this is live. So as I go through the time of day, you will see the lux levels change as we run into the evening and the artificial lights come on. We get different amounts of lux throughout the model. And then if we go back into the daytime, we get different amounts of lights coming in through the window. And again, that kind of functionality, just to be able to get an idea of that, as a designer, and I've been using Revit for many years, I might usually visualize that with a color scheme on a view inside of Revit, which is great, but in here I can visualize it in 3D. I can visualize it in real time from different positions around the room, which for me is fantastic. It makes it so much easier. When I'm using Revit, likelihood is if I'm designing and making decisions that are key, I've got Revit open on screen 1 and I've got Enscape open on screen 2. Maybe not with the live link turned on if I'm live designing or live working, but actually to get that live rendered look and feel and that visual output really helps me make those design decisions. Let's just turn that back off and go back to a normal scale. We can change the depth of field and the exposure. So if I want to have the camera blur after a certain period or before a certain period, we can change the depth of field to start simulating those. I typically do that in Photoshop myself as a post process, but again, you've got the ability to do it there if you want to. You've got all the ability to tweak the atmospherics, the color temperatures to change the mood of the image, just by coming in and playing around with, for example, the color temperature. We can make this a little bit colder to make the office more blue in color, less orange, less warm. So we can start playing around with that color temperature and really making this exactly as we want it. We can change the ambient brightness. We can really tweak and change this, and again, give it a couple of seconds, let it do its ray tracing, let it thinking about its life, and give you an output based on those settings. Anyone that's rendered, used Photoshop, taken images out of Revit and then blended that in Photoshop with a camera match or anything like that, you'll be used to tweaking these kind of settings in those applications in an image editor. The fact that we can come in here and play with the lens flare, play with the amount of bloom that's coming across from the sun and other reflective objects or light sources, it really does allow you to customize that image to the nth degree. And if you're not happy with what you've done, you can just reset to defaults and take that scene back to as it was before. So I'm just going to put that back onto Ultra and back onto 2-point perspective. We've got some more atmospherics. These are more to do with the bigger picture, what's going on outside of the environment, so to speak. So I can turn on fog if I'm doing an exterior shot. It's quite nice to add some atmospherics fog. We can change how bright the sun is. We can change the size of the moon, the shadow sharpness, the brightness of the artificial lights, what horizon we want. So if we want to stick this particular office in an urban setting, for example, we can start tweaking and chopping and changing all of that to see exactly what we want within that image, even down to the contrails or the amount of clouds in the sky, the wind if you've put trees in there, you name it, it does exactly what you would expect it to do. Finally, you have some capture ability. So the ability to push out a still image, the ability to take one of those animations and push them out to an animation file. All of the customization with regards to those under the capture tab. So literally to get to this point, I have a Revit model that I've got default Revit materials on, and for the most part, pretty bog standard objects. These desks, the people, they're all Enscape assets. The benefit of that is I have a button, Asset Library, inside of Enscape, where I can bring stuff into this environment. I can bring to my model things that I may have not, otherwise may not have had time to put in. And these are all render quality assets and models. So it's not a BIM model. It's there purely to give you a better quality render. So create a separate view with these on, hide them in the BIM model, maybe create a separate model just for animation and rendering. But if I come in here, maybe I'm going to come across to animals. Personally, one thing that I think this is missing is an office dog. So let's grab Teddy just here and put them in the office there, just to show you how quickly I can add a high quality asset. And then maybe I'm going to say that we want to have some furniture. Give this a couple of seconds to load. You can see the quality from the preview of these particular assets. They look great. I'm just going to pick this chair just because it's got a bit of texture on there. It will look nice with the shading. And again, I'm just going to put this down somewhere in the room. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this. Make sure you don't press Alt and Tab accidentally. Let's just place that down in the model, just there. As soon as they're placed, as you would imagine, Enscape updates straight away. You now have an office dog, and you've got this asset here as well. And again, the quality of those assets is as you would expect. The materials are great, the textures are great, and they actually look really nice. So the ability to start building up the quality and the realism behind those is fantastic. Let's just take the chair out as it looks a little bit out of place. And maybe we'll move Teddy under this desk. And really, the only things left to say are that we've got a load of other options in here. I'm really only scratching the surface with this today and just kind of trying to explain about how quickly and how easy we can start getting some nice results. We can grab a screenshot at any time. That's your traditional render. We don't actually need to render as such unless we want to place an image into the document. But if I want to get this high quality output and I'm happy with everything and the look and the feel, I just say, take this, take a screenshot, save it somewhere on the desktop, wherever it is that I want to put it. Let's just go on the desktop and hit save. What this will do inside of Enscape is it will think about things for a minute, you'll get a progress bar, and it's just saving that image. It's already rendered, so it's just going to spend a little bit of time iterating that to make sure that the ray tracing is sharp, the shadows and the lighting are where they need to be, and then that image is saved away now onto my desktop, so I can go and open it inside of a file viewer or whatever it might be, which is great. If I just jump into here, go and grab that image just here, nice and crisp. The other thing that we can do is we can output the animation. I won't do that now because it will take a couple of minutes to output, but we can export that camera using the path straight out to an AVI or an MP4 file. We can export standalone executables. So I can actually create an exe file directly from here to share with one of my colleagues, a client, someone outside of the organization. I can also export a web standalone, which will literally upload the Enscape model directly into a web browser. And hopefully this will load up nice and quickly. We're on a pretty quick connection today, but the live session might be stealing some of the bandwidth, so there we go. And as you can see, we get the same kind of look and feel as the draft mode, but you can send this link to anyone that's got a web browser on their PC or other device, and they'll be able to go through. There's some browsers it doesn't work with, but you've got all the same kind of functionality for viewing and visualizing this model directly through a web interface. Now, before the pandemic hit this year, we'd have been talking about VR, one-button VR. Yes, it does that, but the likelihood is that you won't be sharing headsets with people at this time. Absolutely, we'll get back to that, so when we do, you've got the ability to go straight into a VR headset. But the fact that you can just share a link with someone to you look at on their own device is second to none. We can output panos, renders, stills, and animations. All that you would expect. All with the ease of pressing a single button and going from Revit straight into Enscape. And really, I think all that leads me to do is summarize where we are. So I've talked briefly about 3 visualization tools, namely 3ds Max. I love Max. I've been a long time Max user, but naturally it takes a little bit longer to get a nice output. If you want photorealism on your project and you have the time, the money and the skills, then you're never going to beat an output from Max. We talked about Twinmotion. I'm quite passionate about Twinmotion because of how it ties into the games industry and how easy it is to create stunning scenes. Not just a render, but a presentation that you can really bring to life with animations, vegetation, whatever it might be. And for me, if you want to present your project in that way, then you're going to find it difficult to beat a product that's accessible like Twinmotion is. And finally, we talked about Enscape. I've got a real soft spot for Enscape because of how easy it is to use. And actually, that's what I love about it. You do not have to know how to work with these game engines. You don't need to spend hours creating something that looks amazing. If you've got a Revit model with out-of-the-box materials and lights, it will look stunning. If you start Enscape, whack the quality onto Ultra, it will look as you would expect it to look. It looks fantastic. So, you know, really nice functionality, really easy to use, and I implore you, if you haven't yet, to download it and have a look at the demonstration, the evaluation, sorry. And really, I think that pretty much wraps me up. I hope that was useful. Whistle-stop tour, so I appreciate that there's a lot to take in a short space of time, but again, throughout this whole sessions that we had today, thanks for taking the time for the last 45 minutes to see the session. We're going to have another break now for 15 minutes, so go and grab a coffee, take a well-earned rest from the screen, and yeah, we'll see you in 15 for another session.